Hey everyone, welcome back to Shane by Jack Schaefer. I'm Jesse McCarthy, as always, reading this aloud. It's interesting to think about last chapter where kind of Shane, somebody tried to talk some trash to him in a bar and he didn't jump into it. He didn't get sucked into a fight with this guy whose name was Chris. Think about today when people are on social media, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you're on, and somebody throws a kind of a jab at you. Hey, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're this, you're that. And it tends to draw somebody back in, and then they go back and forth. You know, your ideas are stupid, your ideas are ridiculous. Oh no, yours are. And there's this back and forth where Shane kept his cool like crazy. And I don't know, I just found that pretty awesome that he did that. And it was great that, Bob was around to realize what happened. However, if you recall, Chris kind of faked it to himself like, oh no, I was the bigger man. I talked all this trash and Shane didn't do anything. He just walked out with his soda pop like a chicken. Now we know reading the book, and the owner of the store there knew that no, Shane was the tough guy. He's just like, I'm not going to fight you for no reason, you know. So that's kind of what happened last time. So two guys came into town to scare Shane off when he was in town. One guy actually ran off because he was scared once he saw Shane's face. And then Chris tried to start a fight and ended up looking foolish himself, but did not draw Shane into a fight because I think Shane knows better. But things might be a little different this chapter. So let's hop in. Get ready, guys. It was just as Father and Shane had said. The story Chris told was common knowledge all through the valley before the sun set the next day, and the story grew in the telling. Fletcher had an advantage now, and he was quick to push it. He and his foreman, Morgan, a broad slab of a man with flattened face and head small in proportion to great sloping shoulders, were shrewd at things like this, and they kept their men primed to row or push us homesteaders at every chance. They took to using the upper ford, kind of like a river crossing, above Ernie Wright's stand, and riding down the road past our places every time they had an excuse for going to town. They would go by slowly, looking everything over with insolent or kind of like a rude interest and passing remarks for our benefit. So they ride their horses past these homesteaders' houses and talk trash. The same week, maybe 3 days later, a covey, I don't know, I think this means a group, but anyways, a group of them came riding by while Father was putting a new hinge on the corral gate. They acted like they were too busy staring over our land to see him there close. Wonder where Starrett keeps the critters, said one of them. I don't see a pig in sight. But I can smell them, shouted another one. With that, they all began to laugh and whoop and holler and went tearing off, kicking up a lot of dust and leaving Father with a tightness around his mouth that was not there before. Just quickly, if you know, they're not raising pigs, but it's kind of like this joke on farmers. If you're raising pigs, you're like, I don't know, you're worthless and you're dirty. So they're basically calling Shane and Joe and, the whole crew, the whole group of them, they're calling them pigs, or, like farmers just raising a bunch of smelly pigs. They were impartial with intentions like that. They would hand them out anywhere along the line an opportunity offered, but they liked best to catch Father within earshot and burn him with their sarcasm. It was crude. It was coarse. I thought it silly for grown men to act that way, but it was effective. Shane, as self-sufficient as the mountains, could ignore it. Father, while it galled him, could keep it from getting him. The other homesteaders, though, they could not help being irritated and showing they felt insulted. It roughed their nerves and made them angry and restless. They did not know Shane as Father and I did. They were not sure there might not be some truth in the big talk Chris was making. So maybe Shane really is a chicken, That's the feeling that maybe the neighbors, the other homesteaders are having. Things became so bad they could not go into Grafton's store without someone singing out for soda pop. And wherever they went, the conversation nearby always snuck around somehow to pigs. You could sense the contempt building up in town and people who used to be neutral, not taking sides. The effect showed too in the attitude our neighbors now had toward Shane. They were constrained when they called to see Father and Shane was there. They resented that he was linked to them. And as a result, their opinion of Father was changing. That was what finally drove Shane. He did not mind what they thought of him. Since his session with Chris, he seemed to have won a kind of inner peace. He was as alert and watchful as ever, but there was a serenity in him that had erased entirely the old tension. I think he did not care what anyone, anywhere thought of him, except us, his folks. And he knew that with us, he was one of us, unchangeable and always. But he did care what they thought of Father. He was standing silently on the porch the night Ernie Wright and Henry Shipstead were arguing with Father in the kitchen. I can't stomach much more, Ernie Wright was saying. You know the trouble I've had with those blasted cowboys cutting my fence. Today, a couple of them rode over and helped me repair a piece. Help me, damn them. Waited till we were through, then said Fletcher didn't want any of my pigs getting loose and mixing with his cattle. My pigs. There ain't a pig in this whole valley, and they know it. I'm sick of the word. So basically, these guys came over, these cowboys, helped this homesteader fix a fence that they had broken. And the homesteader's kind of like, wow, I know they broke it, but now they're nice helping me to fix it. And then once they were done fixing it, they looked at him and said, yeah, Fletcher just wanted to make sure none of your pigs got loose. So that's like really mocking this guy, making fun of him. Father made it worse by chuckling. Grim, maybe, yet still a chuckle. Sounds like one of Morgan's ideas. He's smart. I mean, he's mean, but Henry Shipstead would not let him finish. This is nothing to laugh at, Joe. You least of all. Damn it, man. I'm beginning to doubt your judgment. None of us can keep our heads up around here anymore. Just a while ago, I was in Grafton's and Chris was there, blowing high about your Shane must be thirsty because he's so scared he hasn't been in town lately for his soda pop. Both of them were hammering at Father now. He was sitting back, saying nothing, his face clouding. You can't dodge it, Joe. This was right. Your man's responsible. You can try explaining all night, but you can't change the facts. Chris braced him for a fight and he ducked out and left us stuck with those stinking pigs. You know as well as I do what Fletcher's doing, growled Henry Shipstead. He's punishing us with this, and he won't let up till one of us gets enough and makes a fool play and starts something so he can move in and finish it. So basically the idea here is that if Fletcher can rile one of these guys up enough, get him worked up, kind of like I was saying with Twitter, like he's making fun of them and then they respond back, and possibly by trying to fight, then Fletcher sicks his men on them and beat them up real bad. So it's almost like the homesteaders would start the fight by throwing a punch, and then Fletcher comes in and is like, oh, well, you threw the punch, so I'm going to take you guys out for real. That's basically what he's attempting to do, Fletcher. Fool play or not, said Ernie Wright, I've had all I can take. The next time one of those... Father stopped him with a hand up for silence. Listen, what's that? It was a horse picking up speed and tearing down our lane into the road. Father was at the door in a single jump, peering out. The others were close behind him. Shane? Father nodded. He was muttering under his breath. As I watched from the doorway of my little room, I could see that his eyes were bright and dancing. He was calling Shane names, cursing him softly, fluently. He came back to his chair and grinned at the other two. That's Shane, he told them, and the words meant more than they seemed to say. All we can do now is wait. They were a silent crew waiting. Mother got up from her sewing in the bedroom where she had been listening as she always did, and came into the kitchen and made up a pot of coffee, and they all sat there sipping at the hot stuff and waiting. It could not have been much more than 20 minutes before we heard the horse again, coming swiftly and slewing around to make the lane without slowing. There were quick steps on the porch, and Shane stood in the doorway. He was breathing strongly, and his face was hard. His mouth was a thin line in the bleakness of his face, and his eyes were deep and dark. He looked at Shipstead and Wright, and he made no effort to hide the disgust in his voice. Your pigs are dead and buried. As his gaze shifted to Father, his face softened, but the voice was still bitter. There's another one down. Chris won't be bothering anybody for quite a spell. He turned and disappeared, and we could hear him leading the horse into the barn. In the quiet following, hoofbeats like an echo sounded in the distance. They swelled louder, and this second horse galloped into our lane and pulled to a stop. Ed Howells jumped to the porch and hurried in. Where's Shane? Out in the barn, Father said. Did he tell you what happened? Not much, Father said mildly. Something about burying pigs? Ed Howells slumped into a chair. He seemed a bit dazed. The words came out of him slowly at first as he tried to make the others grasp just how he felt. I never saw anything like it, he said, and he told about it. He had been in Grafton's store buying a few things, not caring about going into the saloon because Chris and Red Marlin, another of Fletcher's cowboys, had hands in the evening poker game when he noticed how still the place was. So remember, the saloon is a bar that he's walking into. He went over to sneak a look, and there was Shane just moving to the bar, cool and easy, as if the room was empty and he the only one in it. Neither Chris nor Red Marlin was saying a word, though you might have thought this was a good chance for them to cut loose with some of their raw sarcasm. So nobody's making fun of Shane at this point. One look at Shane was enough to tell why. He was cool and easy, right enough, but there was a curious kind of smooth flow to his movements that made you realize, without being conscious of thinking about it, that being quiet was a mighty sensible way to be at this moment. 2 bottles of soda pop, he called to Will Atke. He leaned back to the bar and looked the poker game over with what seemed a friendly interest, while Will fetched the bottles from the store. Not another person even twitched a muscle. They were all watching him and wondering what the play was. I just want to note this scene here, okay? A few days earlier, these cowboys would make fun of all the homesteaders, potentially even Shane, in front of anybody, anywhere, right? Now we've got a bar full of probably men. We've got a poker table with some tough guys like Chris and this other guy, Red Marlin. And Shane is right there for them to make fun of, do anything. But everybody is dead silent. Nobody's talking any trash. And Shane is just kind of cool as a cat, just back to the bar, order a couple soda pops, right? And that's supposed to be like kind of childish to order, soft drinks. Like it would be like a kind of like the equivalent of a Coke or a Pepsi or Sprite, 7-Up, whatever you like, in a bar when you're supposed to be drinking hard alcohol, hard liquor, be a man, that type of thing. And everybody's just dead silent. He took the 2 bottles and walked to the table and set them down, reaching over to put one in front of Chris. The last time I was in here, you bought me a drink. Now it's my turn. The words sort of lingered in the stillness. He got the impression, Ed Howells said, that Shane meant just what the words said. He wanted to buy Chris a drink. He wanted Chris to take that bottle and grin or kind of smile at him and drink with him. You could have heard a bug crawl, I guess, while Chris carefully laid down the cards in his right hand and stretched it to the bottle. Goes to grab that bottle. He lifted it in a sudden jerk and flung it across the table at Shane. So fast Shane moved, Ed Howells said, that the bottle was still in the air when he had dodged, lunged forward, grabbed Chris by the shirt front, and hauled him right out of his chair and over the table. As Chris struggled to get his feet under him, Shane let go the shirt and slapped him, sharp and stinging, 3 times, the hand flicking back and forth so quick you could hardly see it, the slaps sounding like pistol shots. Shane stepped back and Chris stood swaying a little and shaking his head to clear it. He was a game one and mad down to his boots. He plunged in, fist smashing, and Shane let him come, slipping inside the flailing arms and jolting a powerful blow low into his stomach. As Chris gasped and his head came down, Shane brought his right hand up open and with the heel of it caught Chris full on the mouth, snapping his head back and raking up over the nose and eyes. So just boom. The force of it knocked Chris off balance and he staggered badly. His lips were crushed. Blood was dripping over them from his battered nose. His eyes were red and watery and he was having trouble seeing with them. His face, Ed Howe said, and shook a little as he said it, looked like a horse had stomped it. But he drove in again, swinging wildly. So he's not stopping. Shane ducked under, caught one of the flying wrists, twisted the arm to lock it and keep it from bending, and swung his shoulder into the armpit. He yanked hard on the wrist and Chris went up and over him. As the body hurtled over, Shane kept hold of the arm and wrenched it sideways and let the weight bear on it, and you could hear the bone crack as Chris crashed to the floor. It's like threw him over his head, boom, down into the floor. A long sobbing sigh came from Chris, and that died away, and there was not a sound in the room. Shane never looked at the crumpled figure. He was straight and deadly and still. Every line of him was alive and eager, but he stood motionless. Only his eyes shifted to search the faces of the others at the table. They stopped on Red Marlin, and Red seemed to dwindle lower in his chair. You can just imagine him like. Perhaps, Shane said softly, and the very softness of his voice sent shivers through Ed Howe's. Perhaps you have something to say about soda pops or pigs. Red Marlin sat quiet like he was trying not even to breathe. Tiny drops of sweat appeared on his forehead. He was frightened, maybe for the first time in his life, and the others knew it, and he knew they knew, and he did not care, and none of them blamed him at all. Then, as they watched, the fire in Shane smoldered down and out. He seemed to withdraw back within himself. He forgot them all and turned toward Chris, unconscious on the floor, and a sort of sadness, Ed Howe said, crept over him and held him. He bent and scooped the sprawling figure up in his arms and carried it to one of the other tables. Gently, he set it down, the legs falling limp over the edge. He crossed to the bar and took the rag Will used to wipe it and returned to the table and tenderly cleared the blood from the face. He felt carefully along the broken arm and nodded to himself at what he felt. All this while, no one said a word. Not a one of them would have interfered with that man for a year's top wages. Like nobody's going to get in between Shane and anything else at this point. He spoke and his voice rang across the room at Red Marlin. You'd better tote him home and get that arm fixed. Take right good care of him. He has the makings of a good man. Then he forgot them all again and looked at Chris and went on speaking as if that limp figure could not hear him. There's only one thing really wrong with you. You're young. That's the one thing time can always cure. The thought hurt him, and he strode to the swinging doors and went through them into the night. That was what Ed Howells told. The whole business, he finished. It didn't take 5 minutes. It was maybe 30 seconds from the time he grabbed hold of Chris till Chris was out cold on the floor. In my opinion, that Shane is the most dangerous man I've ever seen. I'm glad he's working for Joe here and not for Fletcher. Father leveled a triumphant look at Henry Shipstead. So, I've made a mistake, have I? Before anyone could push in a word, Mother was speaking. I was surprised because she was upset and her voice was a little shrill. I wouldn't be too sure about that, Joe Starrett. I think you've made a bad mistake. Marion, what's got into you? Look what you've done just because you got him to stay on here and get mixed up in this trouble with Fletcher. Father was edging toward being peeved himself. Women never do understand these things. Look at here, Marion. Chris will be all right. He's young and he's healthy. Soon as that arm is mended, he'll be in as good a shape as ever was. Oh, Joe, can't you see what I'm talking about? I don't mean what you've done to Chris. I mean what you've done to Shane. And that's it for the chapter. Man, intense. So no doubt Shane has proved he's a strong man and can really fight people, at least to the neighbors. Clearly he didn't need to prove any of that to himself because he knows who he is, right? As you heard Bob actually say early on, there's this line. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. I love this line. See if we can find it. I think. Oh yeah. When they were talking about all the homesteaders were kind of like talking trash, like, what are you going to do about this guy, Shane, Joe? He's making us all look bad, before obviously he went into the bar and handled business. Bob said, Shane, I think he did not care what anyone anywhere thought of him except us, his folks. And he knew that with us, he was one of us, unchangeable and always. So I'm telling you, I've been around for years, 40 years. It's so rare to find people who don't care about what other people think or feel about them. And I'm talking about I feel pretty like a confident guy. I feel like I got some strong self-esteem, but it's not easy to not care about what other people feel or think. And I feel pretty self-confident. I got a lot of self-esteem, but it's difficult. So to find somebody like Shane who through and through just doesn't care. He knows who he is. He doesn't care what other people think at all. But the problem was they were making Joe look bad, and Shane couldn't have that. So he went in and fought. Anyways, at the end there, Marion, the wife, seems to have some sense in her head where the husband's like, women, and she says, what you've done to Shane by this. So I'm curious what you think she means by that. I have a pretty good sense, but I'm curious yourself. And I'm curious what's going to happen with Shane now that he kind of got dragged back into being a kind of badass in not maybe the best of ways, but we'll see. I'm a little bummed. And in some ways you might think, oh, it's just awesome. Shane just beat this guy up and showed him who's boss in a way, but I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about next chapter. But for a face this time, let me see here. What are we going to do? Let's do that guy, Ed Howes. When he comes to the house and he wants to share his story about what he saw Shane doing, in the bar, in the saloon. Okay. So I'm thinking there's a little bit of excitement, a little bit of shock, and a little bit of fear. There's all sorts of different emotions mixed up in this guy, but let's see if I can get it. And then you do your own face. Okay. That's my face. Curious what you got. That's all for today, guys. As always, good being with you. If you want to contact me, questions, comments, whatever, always leave it in the comment section or reach out, Jesse, Jesse, at jessemccarthy.com. And that's it for now. Shane, We'll be back next time. Adios, guys.